Hello and welcome to yesterday's Airlines. It's time for another fleet video, and in this video we're going to be moving across to the United States section of the collection and taking a look at one of the smaller US trunk airlines of the regulated era. Yes, that is Northeast Airlines, an airline which was taken over by Delta in 1971, but before that had been reasonably unsuccessful, admittedly, operating primarily a small network in the northeast of the United States and trunk routes down to Florida from New England. So Northeast obviously operated a relatively small fleet, not as big as the big four, and you can see that it is housed over here in this cabinet. Stands out because of the yellow. So you get here an overview of my fleet of Northeast Airlines aircraft, and what we're going to do is look through this in a bit more detail and look at the Yellowbirds. Okay, so I've opened up the cabinet that houses this part of the fleet, and you can see we've got Northeast ahead of us, and what we're going to do is start over at the aircraft representing the oldest part of Northeast Airlines history and then move across to the later portion. And you can see in the background we've got a bit of information and some images about Northeast. As you can see, quite early in the history, into the late 60s, or sorry, the late 50s, they were operating this hub from Boston, operating down as far south as Miami, and some services as far north as Montreal. As I said, Northeast was always one of the smallest trunk airlines, and it struggled operating this dense regional network in New England, in Massachusetts and that area, and it was thrown a bone by the cab and given these longer routes down to the sunshine areas, which made it into a trunk airline. But in many ways it was effectively a local service style airline with a few trunk routes. Now, in this early portion of Northeast Airlines history, its logo was a pilgrim figure, which fits very nicely, I guess, with the area that it is from. And you can see when you move down and look at this aircraft down here, you can see perhaps just a little bit at the back of this Convair 240 here that there is the old logo with the pilgrim wearing his hat. So what we've got here is the first scheme from the post-war era, probably from the early 50s, considering it's got a white top, and we've got a Convair, and behind it one of these DC-6 Sunliners. Really attractive blue scheme with the feathers, which was something that a lot of airlines had, a feather-like motif after the cockpit there. Really nice. So that they represent the oldest aircraft that I have for Northeast. Now, Northeast also did order Bristol Britannias, and in fact one was painted up in Northeast colours, but they never actually got into service. Northeast was always struggling for cash. Now, behind the DC-6 we've got the next scheme, which was a scheme that they adopted in the mid to late 50s. Simplification, still nice, not quite as nice. You see you've got the NE logo on the tail. And Northeast also was one of the airlines that took a chance on the Vickers Viscount. So you can see here we've got a Viscount. Obviously they also operated a DC-3 fleet too, so there's one of those here too, but I don't have one in the earlier scheme, hasn't been made. But behind that we've got the Viscount. Northeast and Capital were operators of the Viscount early on. And then behind it, Northeast's first jet, which was acquired, I think, via Torco, you know, Howard Hughes' company. It's part of a deal with them. We've got the Convair 880. I really love the 880. I think it looked great wearing this slightly modified Northeast scheme with these kind of arrow type triangles on the tail. Now, Northeast, as I said, it was always struggling for cash, it was always struggling for profitability, and towards this period of time it really did struggle. And it didn't stop it, however, occasionally getting new equipment, and you can see here that it did operate some early 727-100s, and they are wearing the same scheme that the Convair 880 is. And I think it was around this sort of time in the early 60s when Northeast, again, was in a period of struggling, and it was taken over by, I think it was Storer, a broadcasting organisation. And it wasn't long after that that they had this complete refresh of their logo and introduced this concept of the Yellowbirds. Later on, I'm not sure if they were right at the start, you had this family of Yellowbirds, but it certainly sexed up the image of Northeast in the 60s and introduced some really attractive aircraft. And you can see here that we've got a DC-930, and behind that, Northeast Soul. In fact, no, that's the Convair A80, sorry, in that colours. And to the right, Northeast Soul Convair 990, which I believe was called Rita. Now, as Northeast was recapitalised, it was able to remove the Convairs from the fleet, which is kind of sad, and it was able to standardise on Boeing 727s, and here's a Series 200. And even though it was by this point operating this quite strong network down to the south, especially from Boston, but also from some other northern cities, and it got as far west as Chicago there, and even, as you can see, had a route which got it over to the west coast from Miami. It still had quite a dense regional network up here in the Northeast, and for that it needed smaller aircraft, and Northeast became a customer for the Fairchild Hillier 227. And here's one wearing the Yellowbird scheme. Now, despite the recapitalisation, its network was just not big enough. It was always struggled with profitability, especially against major players like Eastern. And by the early 70s, it was looking for a merger partner. Towards the end of its time, the livery was slightly modified, the Yellowbird scheme, as you see on this 727-100 here. The changes are relatively minor. You can see that it's got Yellowbird titles under the NE on the tail. And also, there is actually now a Yellowbird ahead of the Northeast titles. So that was the last scheme that Northeast had before they were taken over by Delta. Delta had been one of the smaller trunks itself, but was growing very successfully and had been profitable for a long time and was beginning to become a bit of a thorn in the side of Eastern, and it swallowed up Northeast. I think it was 1971, and you can see for a time that some of the aircraft, like this FH227, operated briefly with the Delta widget on the front of the aircraft. And to the right, my last Northeast Airlines aircraft is a DC-930, which has got the last two Yellowbird schemes. So that's really Northeast Airlines in a nutshell. Really like the Northeast schemes, like both the Pilgrim scheme from before the Storer days and like the Yellowbird schemes. Almost all of these models in the fleet here are made by Aero Classics. I think the only one that is not is the 727-200, this one here, which is a geminijets model, but everything else is AC. So that's a quick look through Northeast Airlines, the fleet that I have, and a little bit about their history. Hope you've enjoyed the video. Keep an eye out for my other fleet videos. I'll be doing these for all of my collection, hopefully, including all of the major US airlines of the regulated era. So thanks very much for watching. Check out yesterdaysairlines.com and my Instagram and Facebook channels at yesterdairlines for more of this kind of content, history of the airlines of America and the rest of the world. Thanks very much. See you later.